Very much, because Hal Roach and I, we differed a great deal on story ideas and gags and what have you. And we didn't get along too well on that picture. We disagreed very much.
It wasn't a question of liking him or not. Like, what the hell was he going to do if he didn't? We couldn't make two readers because we couldn't sell them. So, I mean, it wasn't, I didn't want to make features. Nobody wanted to make those kind of features. But we there to make features and do nothing.
In the feature films, rather than having one story, as you would have with the short subjects, you have a musical number, a bit with the romantic leads, and then Laurel and Hardy doing a routine for 5 minutes, and then the cycle repeats itself. And as a result, I think that audiences today are a little bit less satisfied with the feature films than they are with the short subjects, because the short subjects are pure Laurel and Hardy, and in many of the feature films, it tends to be a little bit diluted by the addition of the other elements.
Now, when I fill this with wine, I'll hand it to you. Then you pour it in there. Do you mean to tell me that 500,000 francs is concealed in that little bit of silken lace?
Uh-huh.
I'm sure that Stan knew, as Roach did, you just couldn't sustain pure Laurel and Hardy comedy for an hour and a half. The material wasn't there. I mean, unless you were Chaplin and you had the luxury of working for 2 or 3 years to make a picture.
Certainly, Roach was a good judge of story material in thinking that something like The Bohemian Girl or Fra Diavolo would be a wonderful vehicle for Laurel and Hardy. Those are two excellent films, and even though they have storylines that involve other people and they have lots of musical numbers, they hold up. They are wonderful films.
Let me look at you. You're Spiff.
Where the whole thing fell apart was when I bought this musical in New York, and I got on the train to write the story of the musical. And when I got into the studio, I was so pleased with everything of buying it and having the script. I called all the writers in, and Stan and Babe were not working, and they weren't at the studio. So, I mean, the writers all knew what was the next picture going to be, but they also knew that Stan Laurel couldn't have had any part in it. So he was so mad that he said he couldn't do it because they couldn't wear the derbies for no reason at all. And finally got to the point where I had bought it. I said, all right, you make it. And I had nothing to do with it at all, and he made a lousy picture.
I think that was the first time that I felt my father had really attained stardom, because he was in such a big picture. Usually it was just Babe and Stan and a few people, but to walk onto a set and see hundreds and hundreds of people was really something.
Maybe it is the film in which Roach felt that it was no longer one big happy family where they were all on the same wavelength. And who's to say who would have been right in that matter? Babes in Toyland is a wonderful film as is. And of course, the storyline they ended up with was one that Stan worked on.
What do you think of that?
Pipple. That's the silliest thing I have ever seen.
Try it.
I don't want to try it.
Why, can't you do it?
Well, certainly I can't. What do you mean, can I do it? Give me that stick. Get over there. It's a certainty that anything you can do, I can do. What, for instance?
Now, the public's taste in film comedy was changing. Movie audiences of the 40s were lining up for the films of Abbott and Costello. But Laurel and Hardy continued to make pictures, and we'll look at some of their later films when Biography continues.
Comedy Giants Week continues on Biography tomorrow with W.C. Fields, Milton Berle on Thursday, and Steve Allen on Friday.
With its Chrysler Infiniti 11-speaker sound system and sumptuous leather-trimmed interior, the Chrysler LHS Strong...
A&E's Biography returns to our look at the life of Stan Laurel.
There's a nice pickle we're in. Shot at sunrise.
I hope it's cloudy tomorrow. Say, Ollie,
What?
do you still want to come back as a horse?
I don't care if I never come back.
Laurel and Hardy went to 20th Century Fox and MGM in 1941, they came up against the motion picture studio factories at the peak of their powers. Hal Roach only made 7 or 8 feature films a year at the peak of his production, whereas Fox and MGM made 52 features a year. And there was a very strict schedule that had to be adhered to. And because of that, everything had to be written down in the script. And because of that, there wasn't the spontaneity that you had had in the Hal Roach films.
They didn't buy Stan and his stories. They supplied their own writers. Well, that was dynamite. That's just cutting Stan's throat, you know. So he lost his vigor and his enthusiasm, I felt, and interest in the figures they were producing.
I think they were in their kind of a down period. There was no joking, and don't forget, too, they were older from Hal Roach. This was like 40, 43. And they were quite sedate and quiet. But I don't think they felt, you know, that they were the big stars at the studio.
Hey, you mugs. Gentlemen. Well, it's Laurel and Hardy, as if I didn't know. Hello, boys. This is Pete Smith, as if you didn't know. Say, I'd like your help here for a minute. Do you mind? No, of course not. I just want you lads to show the audience how much wood the average person totes. Wood. Got any?
It's heresy to say, but it's also true that there was a time with the advent of World War II when the style of comedy that Laurel and Hardy were offering was regarded as somehow passé. Now, in retrospect, we look at whatever momentarily eclipsed Laurel and Hardy during that period, and we can't imagine why anyone would prefer Abbott and Costello or whoever else was popular for those few years, why anyone would prefer them to Laurel and Hardy.
You find just as much interest today in the old-time slapstick material?
I think that there is more interest, but there's so little of it done.
That's true.
I think that people want to laugh now, but they don't have the things to laugh at.
Very, very true.
And people nowadays, they want to be connected with the higher type of, we might say, drama.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to be associated with comedy.
Yet they like to see it.
It's because the comedy is difficult to make, you see.
There weren't any further offers, at least at that time. So Stan wrote a 20 or 25-minute sketch, comedy sketch, and their manager in London, Bernard Delfont, I believe he's Lord Delfont today, booked them. And in theaters all over the British Isles.
It was an ironic consolation to Stan Laurel that his career had come full circle. From his beginnings as a boy comedian with Fred Carno to the variety tours which Laurel and Hardy undertook at the end of their careers, Stan had always cherished the response of a live audience. The popularity of the late tours was tangible proof of the affection in which they were held by the public. In spite of the satisfaction they derived from the European tours, the grueling schedule took its toll. In 1954, Oliver Hardy suffered from the first of a series of heart attacks, and Stan Laurel, in turn, succumbed to a minor stroke.
After Stan had had the slight stroke and came home from the hospital, he was in a wheelchair for the first few weeks. And the Hardys, for some reason, hadn't been able to go to the hospital to see him. So they came to the house on Franklin Avenue. And, you know, that could be a very difficult moment. It certainly was. And the bell rang, and Mrs. Laurel went to the door, and there was Oliver and Lucille. And they came in, and they could see just over there Stan sitting in the wheelchair. And he looked toward them, but he didn't speak. And Hardy, it was just absolutely brilliant. He stood there, he looked at Stan, and he said, "Well, here's another nice mess you've gotten into." And he walked over to him and kissed him on the forehead.
While Stan Laurel gradually recovered his health, Oliver Hardy visibly deteriorated. He suffered a debilitating stroke from which he was not to recover, and on August the 7th, 1957, he died.
One thing with my Uncle Babe, I think, comes to my mind more vividly than anything else. When I would visit the set, and there was always a red light over the door when they were shooting, and I'd have to wait until the red light went off, and then I'd enter the stage. And when he would see me, he would start singing "Shine on Harvest Moon," and he usually put me up on his knee. And that's a real fond memory of Uncle Babe.
Shine on, harvest moon, up in the sky. I ain't had no loving since January, April, June, or July. to stay outdoors and spoon. Shine on, harvest moon for me and my girl.
Biography will continue in a moment here on A&E.
That's an old country.
And loved the bottle.
You like children? I do if they're properly cooked.
But he always made them laugh. W.C. Fields as Comedy Giants Week continues only on Biography, tomorrow on A&E.
We now return to Biography here on A&E.
Stan kept his name in the Santa Monica telephone directory so that fans could readily find him. And they did. And very often at that door there would be a family of 3 or 4 from Nebraska or Minnesota or somewhere. Great fans who wanted to meet Stan. They would be invited in and they would ask usually the same questions. How he and Hardy met, how long they'd known each other, and how many pictures. The questions were quite predictable.
Between 55 and 65, they were, among the hottest shows on television, and I didn't get one penny from it. Sad. When I used to talk to him, he was living in an $80 a month apartment. It's a nice apartment, and probably it'd be a lot more today, but back in those days, it was only $80 a month, yeah. But he didn't mind. He laughed about it. He thought it was funny.
After years of neglect by the film industry, in 1961, Stan's genius was recognized with the award of an Oscar, which he named Mr. Clean.
I don't think anybody is making that kind of comedy now. The one thing that I am certain about is that people's ability to laugh and wanting to laugh is not a bit different today than it was 100 years ago. And they laugh at the same things.
I'm sure he just, it would be hard for him to believe that they're really, in a way, more popular today than they were when they were making the films. Even those people who say were in my age and were in high school at the time, maybe they didn't think much about Laurel and Hardy. But today, they've changed their opinion, and their children and grandchildren are enjoying Laurel and Hardy.
I've seen the Laurel and Hardy films, almost all of them, dozens of times, so there are very few surprises in the films left for me. I know all of the gags, but I just love to be in the company of those 2 characters because I find them to be such genuinely nice, lovable people. I just like to spend a little time with them once in a while. And maybe that is why the Laurel and Hardy films continue to have such great popularity when other comedies of that era have been forgotten. They have that element of love in them, which I hope is something that people are going to react to for decades to come.
In closing, I want to say that all my years of experience being with Stan and Babe, I am definitely convinced that there'll never be a day in the future that they will be duplicated, because there is not that talent anywhere. God bless them.
Stan Laurel kept his trademark wit to the very end. A few days before he died, he turned to his nurse and said wistfully, "Oh, I wish I was skiing now." The nurse was surprised. She said, "Mr. Laurel, I didn't know you ski." "I don't," replied Stan, "but I'd sooner be skiing than what I'm doing now." Here's a look at what's coming up on our next biography.
He was ridiculous, outspoken, and irascible, the scoundrel in us all, and he lived his life off-screen much like the character we know and love. W.C. Fields on Biography, as Comedy Giants Week continues tomorrow on A&E.